Welcome to a peaceful journey into the deepest structures of the human psyche, where individual consciousness meets the universal patterns that have shaped human experience for countless generations. Tonight, we explore Carl Gustav Jung's most profound discovery, the archetypes of the collective unconscious, those timeless patterns that connect every human soul to the vast reservoir of wisdom accumulated throughout our species' long evolution. Allow yourself to settle comfortably, feeling your body naturally finding its position of rest as we prepare to descend through the layers of consciousness, past the immediate concerns of daily life, past the personal memories and individual experiences that make up your unique biography, into the deeper realm where all human beings share a common inheritance of psychological patterns and possibilities. Take a slow, deep breath, and as you exhale, feel yourself beginning to let go of the day's accumulated tensions, the specific worries and responsibilities that belong to your individual circumstances, allowing your awareness to expand beyond the boundaries of personal identity toward the universal themes and patterns that Jung discovered operating in every human psyche. The concept of archetypes represents one of Jung's most revolutionary insights into the nature of human consciousness. The recognition that beneath our individual differences, beneath the variations of culture, language, and personal experience, there exist universal patterns of psychological functioning that appear across all human societies and throughout all historical periods. These archetypal patterns are not learned through education or cultural transmission. They are not imposed by society or acquired through personal experience. Rather, they seem to be built into the very structure of the human psyche, inherited through millions of years of evolution, representing the accumulated wisdom of our species' collective journey through the challenges and opportunities of existence. Picture, if you will, the human psyche as an ancient library. One that contains not only the books of your personal experience, but also the accumulated knowledge and wisdom of every human generation that has preceded you. The archetypes are like the fundamental organizing principles of this vast library. The deep structural patterns that determine how human consciousness naturally organizes and interprets experience. Jung first discovered these archetypal patterns through his careful observation of dreams, fantasies, and psychological symptoms. But he soon realized that the same patterns appeared in the myths, religions, and folklore of cultures around the world, in the great works of literature and art that have moved human hearts across centuries, and in the fundamental structures of human societies and institutions. This recognition led Jung to understand that individual psychology was not merely a personal matter, but was intimately connected to the broader patterns of human development and meaning-making that transcend individual existence. Each person's psychological journey was simultaneously unique and universal, following individual paths, while being guided by the same fundamental patterns that have shaped human consciousness since the beginning of our species. The word archetype itself comes from ancient Greek arche, meaning original or first, and typos, meaning pattern or model. Jung chose this term to emphasize that these psychological patterns represent the original blueprints or fundamental forms that underlie all human psychological experience, the basic templates from which individual personalities and life experiences are constructed. But archetypes are not rigid structures that predetermine human behavior. Rather, They are living patterns that provide frameworks for development, offering both opportunities and challenges that guide individuals toward greater wholeness and authenticity. They represent potentials that can be actualized in countless different ways, depending on individual circumstances, cultural context, and personal choices. Jung understood that archetypal patterns operate primarily through what he called projection, the process by which internal psychological patterns are experienced as external realities. When we encounter someone who embodies an archetypal pattern, a wise teacher, a nurturing mother, a courageous hero, we often experience a sense of recognition that goes beyond rational understanding, a feeling that we are encountering something familiar and significant, even if we cannot explain why. This projective quality of archetypes explains why certain people, stories, and symbols carry such powerful emotional charge for us, why we feel immediately drawn to some individuals and repelled by others, why certain myths and stories continue to captivate human imagination across cultures and centuries, and why particular images and symbols appear spontaneously in dreams and fantasies, with meanings that transcend personal experience. The archetypal realm operates according to its own logic, a logic of symbol and metaphor rather than rational causation, a logic of emotional resonance rather than intellectual understanding. To enter this realm requires a different kind of consciousness than the rational, analytical awareness that dominates our waking hours. It requires what Jung called a symbolic attitude, the willingness to approach experience as meaningful, rather than merely factual, as connected to larger patterns, rather than isolated events. As we prepare to explore the specific archetypes that Jung identified, the shadow, the anima, and animus, the self, the wise old man and woman, the mother, the father, the hero, the trickster, and others, we carry with us the understanding that these are not abstract concepts or theoretical constructs, but living patterns that operate within every human psyche, patterns that shape our relationships, guide our development, and connect us to the deepest sources of meaning and purpose in human existence. These archetypal patterns are at work in your own life, influencing your choices and relationships, appearing in your dreams and fantasies, guiding your journey toward greater self-understanding and authentic expression. Tonight, as we explore these universal patterns together, you may recognize familiar themes from your own experience, aspects of your personality and life journey that suddenly make sense within the context of these larger patterns. Jung discovered that conscious relationship with archetypal patterns was crucial for psychological health and spiritual development, that individuals who remained unconscious of these deep influences often found themselves at the mercy of archetypal projections and compulsions, while those who learned to recognize and work with archetypal patterns gained access to profound sources of wisdom, creativity, and authentic power. The journey into archetypal consciousness is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is a transformative process that can fundamentally alter one's understanding of self and world, revealing the deep connections that exist between individual psychology and the universal patterns that have guided human development throughout history. As your breathing naturally slows and deepens, as your body settles into increasing comfort and relaxation, Feel yourself beginning to enter the archetypal realm, that timeless dimension where the concerns of daily life give way to the eternal patterns that shape all human experience, where individual consciousness opens to receive the wisdom that comes from recognizing our connection to something infinitely larger than personal existence. In this state of growing relaxation and receptivity, we are perfectly prepared to explore the archetypal patterns that Jung spent his lifetime studying and documenting, patterns that offer profound insights into the nature of human consciousness and the possibilities for psychological and spiritual development that exist within every human soul. We begin our exploration of specific archetypes with perhaps the most crucial and challenging pattern that Jung identified. The shadow, that aspect of the psyche that contains all the parts of ourselves we have learned to reject, deny, or hide from conscious awareness. The shadow archetype represents one of Jung's most practical and immediately relevant discoveries. For every human being, without exception, carries within their psyche this collection of rejected aspects, qualities, desires, and potentials that have been deemed unacceptable by the conscious personality and banished to the darkness of the unconscious mind. Imagine your conscious personality, the self you present to the world, and even to yourself, as a brightly lit room, where only the most acceptable and socially approved aspects of your nature are allowed to dwell. The shadow represents everything that has been excluded from this illuminated space. All the qualities, impulses, and potentials that exist in the darkness beyond the conscious personality's carefully maintained boundaries. This shadow content is not necessarily evil or pathological. Often, it contains valuable aspects of personality that were rejected not because they were inherently harmful, but because they conflicted with the image we learned to maintain in order to gain acceptance, love, or social approval. A person raised in a family that valued only rational, logical thinking might banish their emotional, intuitive nature to the shadow. A child taught that anger was always unacceptable might reject all aspects of their natural assertiveness and healthy aggression. Someone who learned that only selfless service was virtuous might relegate their legitimate personal needs and desires to shadow status. The shadow, Jung discovered, appears most commonly in dreams as a figure of the same gender as the dreamer, often representing the opposite of the dreamer's conscious self-image. If we see ourselves as good, the shadow appears as bad. If we pride ourselves on being rational, the shadow appears emotional and irrational. If we identify with being helpful and accommodating, the shadow appears selfish and demanding. But Jung's crucial insight was that the shadow, despite its often disturbing appearance in dreams and projections, actually contains essential aspects of psychological wholeness. The qualities we have rejected and relegated to the shadow often represent not our worst aspects, but our unlived potential, aspects of ourselves that must be acknowledged and integrated if we are to become complete, authentic human beings. The process of shadow work, the gradual recognition and integration of rejected aspects of personality, represents one of the most important tasks of psychological development. This work requires tremendous courage and honesty, the willingness to acknowledge that we are not who we have pretended to be, that we contain capacities and tendencies that contradict our carefully maintained self-image. Yet Jung discovered that this confrontation with the shadow was not ultimately destructive, but profoundly liberating. When we stop expending enormous psychic energy, maintaining the fiction of a one-sided, purely positive self-image, when we acknowledge and accept the full range of human potentials that exist within us, we gain access to a much more complete and authentic sense of personal power and possibility. The shadow appears not only in individual psychology, but in collective forms that shape entire societies and cultures. Jung observed that groups often project their collective shadow onto other groups, seeing in foreign cultures, different races, or opposing political parties all the qualities they refuse to acknowledge in themselves. This collective shadow projection creates much of the conflict and misunderstanding that characterizes human societies, as groups fight against external enemies that actually represent aspects of their own rejected nature. Understanding shadow projection can provide profound insights into social and political dynamics, revealing how much of what we see as external conflict actually reflects internal psychological divisions that have been projected onto the outer world. Working with the shadow requires developing what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposing aspects of personality, without immediately choosing one side or the other. This capacity to contain paradox and contradiction, to acknowledge that we are simultaneously capable of great goodness and great selfishness, profound wisdom and remarkable foolishness, genuine love and petty resentment, represents a crucial step in psychological maturity. The shadow also serves as a source of creative energy and authentic personal power. Much of what we have relegated to shadow status represents not weakness or pathology, but natural human capacities that were simply incompatible with the limited role we learned to play in early life. A person who learned to be always agreeable and accommodating might discover in their shadow the capacity for healthy assertiveness and boundary setting that they desperately need to develop. Someone who identified completely with being helpful and selfless might find in their shadow legitimate personal desires and ambitions that, when acknowledged and integrated, lead to a more balanced and fulfilling life. Jung observed that individuals who refused to acknowledge their own shadow inevitably found themselves at the mercy of shadow projections, seeing in others the very qualities they could not accept in themselves, creating relationships and conflicts that forced them to confront their rejected aspects through external circumstances. But those who courageously undertook the work of shadow integration discovered that acknowledging their complete humanity, accepting both their light and dark potentials, led not to moral confusion or behavioral chaos, but to a more stable and authentic form of ethical behavior, based on genuine self-knowledge, rather than unconscious self-deception. The shadow, when approached with courage and honesty, becomes not an enemy to be defeated, but an ally in the journey toward wholeness. It contains not only our rejected weaknesses, but also our unlived strengths, creative potentials that have been suppressed, leadership capacities that have been denied, passionate intensities that have been tamed into blandness. As you continue to relax more deeply, feeling your consciousness naturally expanding beyond the narrow confines of everyday self-image, you might sense your own shadow, not as a threatening enemy, but as a long-lost aspect of yourself that contains valuable potentials you have not yet fully explored or expressed. This recognition need not be disturbing or alarming. Jung understood that the shadow reveals itself most safely and beneficially when consciousness is in a state of relaxed receptivity, when the ego's defensive structures are softened by rest, and the natural wisdom of the psyche can begin the gradual process of integration and healing. Tonight, as you sleep and dream, your psyche will continue this ancient work of shadow integration, gently bringing forward aspects of yourself that are ready to be acknowledged and accepted, weaving together the disparate threads of your personality into a more complete and authentic sense of who you truly are. We now turn our attention to perhaps the most mysterious and transformative of Jung's archetypal discoveries, the Anima and Animus. Those archetypal patterns that represent the contrasexual aspect within every human psyche, the inner feminine principle in men and the inner masculine principle in women. These archetypal patterns reveal one of Jung's most profound insights: that psychological wholeness requires the integration of both masculine and feminine principles within the individual psyche, regardless of one's biological gender or sexual orientation. Every complete human being contains both receptive and assertive capacities, both nurturing and goal-directed energies, both the ability to receive and contain experience, and the drive to act upon and transform the world. The Anima, Jung's term for the feminine principle within the male psyche, represents qualities that patriarchal societies have traditionally associated with femininity: receptivity, intuition, emotional depth, connection to the unconscious, the ability to relate and empathize, appreciation for beauty and meaning, and the capacity for inner reflection and contemplative awareness. In men who have been conditioned to identify exclusively with traditionally masculine qualities, rationality, achievement, independence, emotional control, the anima often remains unconscious and undeveloped, leading to a one-sided personality that lacks access to the full range of human psychological capacities. Jung observed that men with an undeveloped anima relationship often projected these feminine qualities onto women in their lives, expecting women to carry their emotional life, their connection to beauty and meaning, their capacity for intuitive understanding. This projection creates relationships where women are burdened with responsibilities that actually belong to the man's own psychological development. But when men learn to recognize and develop relationship with their inner anima, when they cultivate their own emotional intelligence, intuitive awareness, and capacity for receptive contemplation, they become more complete human beings, capable of richer relationships and more authentic creative expression. The anima appears in dreams and fantasies as feminine figures who often serve as guides to the unconscious, wise women, mysterious maidens, powerful goddesses, or simply unknown women who seem to possess special knowledge or spiritual significance. These anima figures in dreams are not representations of actual women, but aspects of the dreamer's own psychological potential seeking recognition and development. The animus, conversely, represents the masculine principle within the female psyche, qualities traditionally associated with masculinity, such as logical thinking, assertive action, goal-directed behavior, the capacity for independent judgment, spiritual aspiration toward transcendent meaning, and the ability to discriminate and make decisive choices. Women who have been conditioned to identify exclusively with traditionally feminine roles, nurturing, accommodation, emotional availability, relationship-focused behavior, often have an undeveloped animus, leading to difficulties with assertion, independent thinking, and the pursuit of personal goals and ambitions. Jung discovered that women with unconscious animus patterns often projected these masculine qualities onto men, expecting men to provide direction, make important decisions, carry the burden of ambition and achievement, and serve as connections to the world of ideas and spiritual meaning. But when women develop conscious relationship with their inner animus, when they cultivate their capacity for clear thinking, decisive action, and the pursuit of personal vision and purpose, they gain access to a more complete range of human potentials and become capable of more authentic self-expression and independence. The animus often appears in dreams as masculine figures who represent different levels of development, from primitive, brutish male figures representing undifferentiated assertive energy to wise spiritual teachers representing highly developed masculine consciousness. These dream figures represent not actual men, but aspects of the woman's own psychological potential at various stages of development. Jung identified 4 typical stages in the development of both anima and animus, each representing a more mature and integrated relationship with the contrasexual archetype. In the first stage, the anima appears as a purely biological, instinctual feminine figure, representing basic life energy and sexual attraction, but lacking psychological sophistication. The animus at this stage appears as a figure of pure physical power, the strong man who represents undifferentiated assertive force without wisdom or discrimination. The second stage sees the development of romantic and aesthetic qualities in the anima. She becomes the inspiring muse, the beautiful beloved who motivates creative and spiritual aspiration. The animus at this stage becomes the romantic hero or charismatic leader, representing idealized masculine qualities that inspire action and devotion. In the third stage, the anima develops wisdom and spiritual qualities, becoming the wise woman, the priestess, or the spiritual guide who provides connection to transcendent meaning and inner wisdom. The animus becomes the wise teacher, the spiritual warrior, or the principled leader who represents developed masculine consciousness and ethical discrimination. The fourth and highest stage represents the full integration of the contrasexual archetype. The anima becomes Sophia, divine wisdom itself, while the animus becomes the spiritual king or wise ruler who represents the highest development of masculine consciousness in service of transcendent purpose. This developmental sequence represents not just theoretical stages, but actual psychological processes that individuals can observe in their own relationship with contrasexual qualities. Dreams often provide clear indications of where one stands in this developmental process and what kinds of growth are needed to move toward greater integration. The integration of anima and animus represents one of the most crucial tasks in what Jung called the individuation process, the lifelong journey towards psychological wholeness and authentic self-expression. This integration cannot be accomplished through intellectual understanding alone, but requires actual experience and relationship with these archetypal patterns as they appear in dreams, active imagination, and projections in outer relationships. One of the most common ways people first encounter their contrasexual archetype is through projection onto romantic partners, falling in love with someone who seems to embody the qualities they lack in themselves. While this projection can create the powerful attraction necessary for intimate relationship, Jung understood that lasting relationship satisfaction requires gradually withdrawing these projections and developing the projected qualities within oneself. The process of withdrawing Anima and Animus projections often creates crisis in romantic relationships, as partners realize they have been relating not to the actual person, but to their own psychological projections. But this crisis, while difficult, creates the opportunity for more authentic relationship based on genuine appreciation for the other person, rather than unconscious need for psychological completion. Jung also observed that creative individuals often had particularly well-developed relationships with their contrasexual archetype. Male artists and writers frequently showed strong anima development, while female creative individuals often demonstrated significant animus integration. This connection between creativity and contrasexual development suggests that accessing the full range of human psychological potentials is crucial for authentic creative expression. The integration of anima and animus also plays a crucial role in spiritual development. Many mystical traditions speak of the union of masculine and feminine principles as representing the highest spiritual achievement, the sacred marriage that creates wholeness and connection to divine consciousness. Jung understood these spiritual teachings as descriptions of psychological processes that were available to every individual willing to undertake the work of inner development. As you continue to rest in this peaceful state of expanded awareness, you might sense the presence of your own contrasexual archetype, not as something foreign or threatening, but as a long-neglected aspect of your own deepest nature, qualities and capacities that have been waiting patiently for recognition and development. This recognition brings with it a profound sense of homecoming, the feeling of finally accessing parts of yourself that have remained hidden or undeveloped, potentials that, when integrated, create a more complete and authentic sense of personal identity and possibility. Tonight, as your unconscious mind continues its natural work of integration and development, the anima, or animus, archetype may appear in your dreams, offering guidance, challenge, or simply presence as you continue the lifelong journey towards psychological wholeness and authentic self-expression. In the depths of the human psyche lies an archetypal pattern that Jung identified as among the most numinous and transformative, the archetype of the wise old man and wise old woman, those profound figures that represent the accumulated wisdom of human experience and the deepest understanding that emerges from a lifetime of growth, learning, and spiritual development. These archetypal figures appear across all cultures and throughout history, as the sage, the guru, the wise grandmother, the hermit, the medicine man or woman, the spiritual teacher who has transcended the ordinary concerns of daily life and gained access to deeper sources of knowledge and understanding. The wise old man archetype, which Jung also called the senex, represents the masculine principle of wisdom, the capacity for clear discrimination, spiritual authority, and the kind of deep understanding that comes from having successfully navigated the major challenges and transitions of human existence. This figure embodies qualities of patience, perspective, and the ability to see the larger patterns that govern human experience. The wise old woman, or Sophia archetype, represents feminine wisdom, the deep knowing that emerges from connection to the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The intuitive understanding that comes from having experienced the full range of human emotions and relationships, the wisdom that flows from accepting and integrating all aspects of human experience rather than rejecting what seems difficult or unacceptable. These archetypal figures serve crucial functions in psychological development. They represent the potential for wisdom that exists within every human being. The possibility that comes from successfully completing the major developmental tasks of life and gaining access to the deeper understanding that transcends personal concerns and limitations. Jung observed that the wise old man or woman often appears in dreams and fantasies during times of major life transitions, when individuals are facing challenges that require more wisdom and perspective than their current conscious resources can provide. These archetypal figures appear as guides and teachers, offering insight, encouragement, and sometimes challenge that helps the dreamer navigate difficult passages and access deeper levels of understanding. The appearance of these wisdom figures in dreams is often profoundly meaningful. They typically appear with an aura of authority and numinous presence that immediately distinguishes them from ordinary dream characters. They may appear as teachers, healers, spiritual guides, or simply as elderly figures who radiate wisdom and understanding. Sometimes these figures offer specific guidance or instruction, providing answers to questions that have been troubling the dreamer or offering perspective on difficult life situations. At other times, their presence alone seems to provide comfort and reassurance, a sense that deeper wisdom is available even when conscious understanding feels inadequate. The wise old man archetype connects to what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to move beyond the limitations of either-or thinking and embrace the paradoxes and complexities that characterize mature understanding. This archetype represents the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, to see the larger patterns that connect seemingly contradictory experiences, and to find meaning and purpose, even in the midst of life's inevitable difficulties and uncertainties. The wise old woman archetype embodies what Jung understood as the deepest feminine wisdom, the knowledge that comes from accepting and embracing the full cycle of existence: birth, growth, maturity, decline, death, and rebirth. This archetype represents the capacity to find meaning and beauty even in life's darker phases. The understanding that comes from recognizing the essential interconnectedness of all experience. These wisdom archetypes also represent the potential for what Jung called generativity, the capacity that emerges in the later phases of life to contribute to the welfare of future generations through the sharing of accumulated wisdom and understanding. They embody the possibility of moving beyond purely personal concerns to serve the larger patterns of human development and cultural evolution. In traditional societies, these archetypal patterns were often embodied by actual elders who served as wisdom keepers and spiritual guides for their communities. The respected grandmother who knew the healing properties of plants and the deeper meanings of traditional stories, the village elder who could mediate disputes and provide counsel during difficult times, the spiritual teacher who had undergone the initiations and trials necessary to access transpersonal wisdom. In modern societies, where traditional structures of aging and wisdom are often disrupted, these archetypal patterns may be more likely to appear in internal form through dreams, meditation, or other forms of inner experience. But their function remains the same: to provide access to sources of understanding, that transcend the limitations of purely personal experience and rational analysis. Jung discovered that establishing conscious relationship with these wisdom archetypes was crucial for successful aging and spiritual development. Individuals who could access and embody these archetypal patterns often experienced the later phases of life as periods of profound meaning and contribution, while those who remained, identified with younger archetypal patterns, often struggled with the inevitable limitations and losses that come with advancing age. The wisdom archetypes also play crucial roles in creative and intellectual development. Many of history's greatest artists, writers, and thinkers have described relationships with inner figures who served as sources of inspiration and guidance, mysterious teachers who appeared in dreams or meditation and provided access to insights that seemed to come from beyond ordinary consciousness. These archetypal figures represent not just individual potential, but connection to what Jung called the objective psyche, the deeper layers of the collective unconscious that contain the accumulated wisdom of human experience across cultures and historical periods. When we establish relationship with the wise old man or woman within our own psyche, we gain access to insights and understanding that transcend our personal knowledge and experience. The development of relationship with these wisdom archetypes requires qualities that are often underdeveloped in youth-oriented cultures: patience, humility, respect for experience and tradition, and the willingness to acknowledge that there are forms of knowledge that cannot be acquired through education or analysis alone, but emerge only through lived experience and spiritual development. Jung understood that these archetypal patterns represented not just possibilities for the future, but potentials that existed within every individual psyche, regardless of age. Young people who had undergone significant trials or spiritual development might gain access to wisdom archetypal patterns, while older individuals who had not engaged in inner development might remain cut off from these deeper sources of understanding. The cultivation of relationship with wisdom archetypes often requires practices that create space for inner reflection and contemplation. Meditation, journal writing, time spent in nature, engagement with wisdom traditions and spiritual teachings. Activities that allow consciousness to move beyond the immediate pressures of daily life and access deeper levels of understanding and perspective. As you rest in this state of peaceful receptivity, you might sense the presence of your own inner wisdom figures, those aspects of your deepest nature that have been quietly accumulating understanding and insight throughout all your experiences, waiting for moments of quiet reflection to offer their guidance and perspective. These figures are not separate from you. They represent the highest potentials of your own developing consciousness, the wisdom that emerges when all your experiences are allowed to settle and integrate, when the lessons learned through joy and sorrow alike are distilled into deeper understanding and compassion. Tonight, as your consciousness naturally opens to the deeper layers of the psyche, you may encounter these wisdom figures in your dreams, offering exactly the insight, perspective, or encouragement that your current life situation requires. Deep within the collective unconscious lies one of the most primal and powerful archetypal patterns that Jung identified: the Great Mother. That fundamental archetypal structure that represents the source of life, nurture, protection, and the cyclical patterns of birth, growth, death, and rebirth that govern all existence. This archetypal pattern extends far beyond personal relationships with individual mothers. It represents the deep psychological structure that connects human consciousness to the fundamental life force itself, the creative principle that brings forth and sustains all manifestations of existence. The Great Mother archetype appears across all cultures and throughout human history, in countless forms, as the Earth Mother who gives birth to all life, as the divine feminine who represents the creative aspect of cosmic consciousness, as the nurturing goddess who provides sustenance and protection, as the wise woman who knows the secrets of healing and transformation. This archetype embodies the feminine principle in its most fundamental form, not the gender-specific characteristics that societies assign to women, but the universal psychological pattern of receptivity, containment, nurture, and the capacity to create and sustain life through patient, devoted attention and care. Jung observed that the mother archetype appears in two primary aspects: the positive mother, who represents nurture, protection, unconditional love, and the security of being completely accepted and cared for, and the negative or devouring mother, who represents overprotection, possessiveness, the refusal to allow growth and independence, and the tendency to consume rather than nurture the life force of others. Both aspects of the mother archetype serve important psychological functions. The positive mother provides the fundamental sense of security and acceptance that serves as the foundation for all healthy psychological development. The deep knowing that one is wanted, valued, and deserving of care that allows individuals to develop confidence and the ability to extend care to others. The negative mother aspect often appears when the nurturing function becomes excessive or misdirected, when care becomes control, when protection becomes imprisonment, when love becomes possessiveness that prevents growth and individuation. This aspect of the archetype appears in dreams and psychological symptoms, as the smothering mother, the witch who devours children, or the seductive feminine figure who lures individuals away from their own development and authentic expression. The Great Mother archetype is intimately connected to what Jung understood as the fundamental rhythm of psychological life, the cycle of regression and progression that characterizes all growth and development. Just as natural life follows cycles of death and rebirth, psychological development requires periodic returns to the maternal source for renewal and regeneration. These psychological returns to the mother often occur during times of major life transitions, illness, creative blocks, or spiritual crisis, when individuals need to reconnect with the fundamental source of life energy and nurture before they can continue their journey of growth and development. Jung discovered that individuals with healthy relationships to the mother archetype were able to access this nurturing energy within themselves. They could provide self-care during difficult periods, offer genuine nurture to others, and maintain connection to the creative life force, even during challenging circumstances. But those with disturbed mother archetype relationships often struggled with issues of self-care, boundaries in nurturing relationships, and access to their own creative and life-sustaining energies. They might become either excessively dependent on others for nurture or compulsively overgiving in ways that depleted their own resources. The mother archetype also appears in collective forms that shape entire cultures and societies. Jung observed that some societies embody the positive mother archetype, creating cultures that value, nurture, cooperation, care for the vulnerable, and sustainable relationship with the natural environment. Other societies or historical periods might be dominated by the negative mother archetype, creating suffocating social structures, overprotective institutions, or cultural patterns that prevent individual growth and authentic expression in favor of collective conformity and dependence. The Great Mother archetype is particularly important for understanding creativity and the artistic process. Jung observed that creative individuals often had complex relationships with this archetypal pattern, needing to access the nurturing, life-giving aspects of the mother archetype to sustain their creative work, while also needing to resist the devouring aspects that might consume their individual vision and authentic expression. Many artists and writers have described their relationship with creativity in maternal terms, as giving birth to their work, nurturing projects through long periods of development, or being fertile or barren in their creative capacity. This language reflects the deep connection between the mother archetype and the creative process itself. The mother archetype also plays a crucial role in healing and therapeutic work. The therapeutic relationship often constellates the mother archetype, providing the safe, nurturing container within which individuals can regress to earlier developmental stages, work through unresolved issues, and experience the kind of unconditional acceptance that allows for genuine psychological growth and transformation. Jung understood that effective therapy required the therapist to embody the positive aspects of the mother archetype, providing genuine care and acceptance, while avoiding the negative aspects of overprotection or possessive control that might prevent the client's authentic development and eventual independence. The mother archetype is also intimately connected to our relationship with the natural world. The earth itself serves as a powerful symbol of the Great Mother, providing sustenance, beauty, and the cyclical patterns of seasonal death and rebirth that mirror psychological processes of growth and transformation. Indigenous cultures often maintained conscious relationship with this Earth Mother aspect of the archetype, recognizing the land as a living, nurturing presence that required reciprocal care and respect. The loss of this archetypal connection in modern industrial societies has contributed to both individual psychological problems and collective environmental crises. Personal relationship with the mother archetype can be developed through practices that honor the nurturing, life-sustaining aspects of existence, spending time in nature, engaging in gardening or cooking, caring for children or animals, creating art or music, or any activity that involves tending and nurturing life in its various forms. Jung also emphasized the importance of recognizing when the mother archetype becomes activated in relationships and projections. Many romantic relationships involve powerful projections of the mother archetype, with partners expected to provide the kind of unconditional nurture and acceptance that belongs to the parent-child relationship rather than adult partnership. Understanding these projections can help create more realistic and sustainable relationships based on mutual care rather than one-sided parental dynamics. It can also help individuals develop their own capacity for self-nurture, rather than remaining dependent on others for basic psychological sustenance. The integration of the mother archetype represents one of the fundamental tasks of psychological development. Learning to access the nurturing, life-sustaining energies within oneself while maintaining appropriate boundaries and the capacity for continued growth and individuation. As you continue to rest in this state of deep relaxation, you might sense the presence of the Great Mother archetype within your own psyche, that fundamental life-giving energy that has sustained you through all your experiences, the deep source of acceptance and care that exists within your own nature. This recognition brings with it a profound sense of being held and supported, not by external circumstances or other people, but by the fundamental life force itself, the creative principle that continues to sustain and nurture your existence moment by moment. Tonight, as you surrender to the natural rhythms of rest and renewal, you participate in the ancient cycle of the Mother archetype, returning to the source for regeneration and healing, allowing the deep nurturing energies of the psyche to restore and prepare you for continued growth and authentic expression. Within the vast landscape of archetypal patterns, perhaps none is more universally recognized or personally relevant than the hero archetype, that fundamental pattern of psychological development that appears in the myths, legends, and stories of every human culture. And that represents the essential journey of growth, challenge, and transformation that every individual must undertake in the process of becoming authentically themselves. The hero's journey, as Jung understood it, represents far more than adventure stories or tales of external conquest. It describes the archetypal pattern of psychological development, the process by which individuals separate from the comfortable familiarity of their origins, encounter challenges that test and develop their capacities, and eventually return with new wisdom and abilities that benefit both themselves and their communities. This archetypal pattern operates at multiple levels of human experience. In the major life transitions that mark individual development, in the creative process that brings forth new works of art and literature, in the spiritual journey that leads from conventional consciousness to deeper understanding, and in the daily challenges that offer opportunities for growth and self-discovery. Jung identified the hero's journey as following a characteristic pattern that appears with remarkable consistency across cultures and historical periods, beginning with the call to adventure that disrupts the familiar routine of ordinary life, proceeding through trials and challenges that test the individual's courage and resources, often involving a descent into the underworld or confrontation with death and transformation, and culminating in the return to ordinary life with new wisdom, power, or insight that serves not only personal development, but the welfare of the larger community. The hero archetype represents the ego's capacity to separate from the comfortable dependence of childhood, to venture forth into the unknown territories of adult responsibility and authentic self-expression, to face the inevitable challenges and setbacks that accompany any genuine attempt at growth and development, and to persist through difficulties until new levels of capability and understanding are achieved. But Jung understood that the hero's journey was not a single event that occurred once in youth, but a recurring pattern that appeared throughout life whenever circumstances called for growth, change, or the development of new capacities. Each major life transition, career changes, relationship developments, creative projects, spiritual challenges, might involve its own version of the hero's journey. The first stage of the hero's journey typically involves what mythologist Joseph Campbell called the call to adventure, that moment when circumstances present an opportunity or challenge that cannot be met with existing resources or familiar approaches. This call might appear as an external opportunity, a job offer, a relationship possibility, a creative inspiration, or as an internal pressure, a growing dissatisfaction with current circumstances, a sense that something more is possible, or a feeling that continued growth requires moving beyond familiar limitations. Jung observed that this call to adventure often appears first as a sense of restlessness or dissatisfaction with current circumstances, a feeling that life has become too routine, too predictable, or too limiting. This restlessness represents the psychological pressure that builds when the personality has outgrown its current structure and needs to develop new capacities or explore new territories of experience. The second characteristic stage involves crossing the threshold, the decision to leave behind the familiar and venture into unknown territory. This threshold crossing requires courage, the willingness to give up the security of familiar circumstances in favor of uncertain possibilities for growth and development. Jung understood that this threshold crossing often involves a symbolic death of the old identity or way of being, a letting go of familiar roles, relationships, or self-concepts that have become too limiting. This death aspect of the hero's journey explains why genuine growth often involves periods of confusion, loss, or disorientation, as old structures dissolve before new ones have fully formed. The central portion of the hero's journey involves trials and challenges that test and develop the individual's capacities. These challenges serve multiple functions. They force the development of new skills and abilities. They reveal inner resources that might otherwise remain dormant, and they gradually build the confidence and wisdom necessary for authentic leadership and self-expression. Jung observed that these trials often involve confrontations with archetypal patterns that represent different aspects of psychological development. The hero might encounter the shadow in the form of enemies or obstacles that represent rejected aspects of the personality, face the anima or animus in relationships that challenge assumptions about gender roles and emotional expression, or meet the wise old man or woman in the form of mentors or guides who offer crucial wisdom and support. The most profound stage of the hero's journey often involves what mythologists call the ordeal, a confrontation with death, failure, or the complete dissolution of familiar identity structures. This ordeal represents the deepest point of the transformative process, the moment when all familiar resources seem inadequate, and the individual must discover entirely new sources of strength and understanding. Jung understood this ordeal as representing the ego's encounter with the self, that deeper center of personality that transcends the limitations of conscious identity and contains the individual's authentic potential for wholeness and self-expression. This encounter often involves a temporary dissolution of ego consciousness, a symbolic death that allows for rebirth at a more authentic and integrated level of functioning. The climax of the hero's journey involves the achievement of the quest's goal, the treasure, the elixir, the wisdom, or the rescue that represents the successful completion of the transformative process. But Jung emphasized that this achievement is not primarily external. It represents the internal development of new capacities, insights, or levels of integration that enable more authentic and effective functioning in the world. The final stage of the hero's journey involves the return to ordinary life, with the gifts gained through the transformative process. This return is often as challenging as the original departure. It requires learning how to integrate new insights and capacities into the practical requirements of daily life, and how to share the benefits of personal transformation with others in ways that serve the larger community. Jung observed that many individuals successfully complete the departure and ordeal phases of the hero's journey, but struggle with the return. They gain profound insights or develop significant new capacities, but have difficulty integrating these achievements into practical life or sharing them in ways that benefit others. The hero archetype also appears in shadow or distorted forms when the pattern becomes inflated or misdirected. The ego might identify so completely with the hero role that it becomes grandiose, assuming that all challenges can be conquered through individual effort, and refusing to acknowledge legitimate limitations or the need for help and support from others. Alternatively, individuals might become addicted to the excitement and intensity of the hero's journey, constantly seeking new challenges and adventures, while avoiding the slower, more sustained work of integration and relationship that gives life stability and depth. Jung emphasized that authentic heroism involved not just the courage to venture forth and face challenges, but the wisdom to know when action is appropriate and when receptivity and patience are required. The discrimination to choose worthy goals that serve not just personal aggrandizement, but genuine development and service to others. The hero archetype also operates at collective levels, appearing in the stories and myths that guide entire cultures through periods of challenge and transformation. Societies facing external threats, internal conflicts, or evolutionary pressures often turn to hero myths and stories for inspiration and guidance about how to meet these challenges with courage and wisdom. Understanding the hero archetype can provide profound insight into personal life patterns, helping individuals recognize when they are being called to growth and development, identify the resources and support they need for transformative journeys, and integrate the insights and capacities gained through challenging experiences. As you continue to rest in this peaceful state of awareness, you might recognize the hero's journey operating in your own life, the calls to adventure that have disrupted familiar routines, the challenges that have tested and developed your capacities, the moments of transformation that have led to new levels of understanding and authentic expression. This recognition brings with it a sense of participation in the great archetypal patterns that have guided human development throughout history. The understanding that your personal challenges and growth experiences connect you to the universal human journey of becoming more fully yourself while serving something larger than individual concerns. Tonight, as your unconscious mind continues its natural work of integration and development, you may dream of hero journeys yet to come, new adventures in consciousness that will continue your lifelong process of growth, discovery, and authentic self-expression. Among the archetypal patterns that Jung identified, few are as paradoxical and transformative as the trickster. That mischievous figure who appears in the mythologies and folklore of cultures worldwide, representing the principle of creative chaos, boundary crossing, and the kind of unexpected change that disrupts established patterns and creates new possibilities for growth and understanding. The trickster archetype embodies qualities that conventional consciousness often finds disturbing or threatening: unpredictability, irreverence toward established authority, the tendency to violate social norms and expectations, and the capacity to find humor and creative possibility in the midst of serious or challenging circumstances. Yet Jung understood that the trickster serves essential functions in both individual psychology and collective cultural development, representing the creative principle that prevents consciousness from becoming too rigid or one-sided, the force that introduces necessary flexibility and adaptation when established patterns have become outdated or dysfunctional. In individual psychology, the trickster often appears during times when the personality has become too structured, too predictable, or too identified with conventional roles and expectations. The trickster energy emerges to shake up these rigid patterns, introducing unexpected events, encounters, or insights that force consciousness to adapt and develop new responses. This archetypal pattern might manifest as the sudden impulse to make dramatic life changes, the attraction to unconventional people or experiences that challenge familiar assumptions, the emergence of creative ideas that seem to come from nowhere, or simply the capacity to find humor and playfulness in situations that had previously seemed only serious or problematic. The trickster appears in dreams as figures who violate normal expectations, animals that talk, people who change gender or identity, situations that transform without warning, or characters who seem to know more than they should about the dreamer's hidden thoughts or secret desires. Jung observed that trickster dreams often appeared when the dreamer's conscious attitude had become too rigid or one-sided, when the personality needed to develop greater flexibility, creativity, or willingness to consider alternative approaches to life challenges. The trickster archetype is closely connected to what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to move beyond either-or thinking and embrace the paradoxes and contradictions that characterize mature psychological development. The trickster represents the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, to find creative solutions that transcend conventional limitations, and to maintain psychological flexibility in the face of changing circumstances. This archetypal pattern is also intimately connected to creativity and artistic expression. Many of history's greatest artists, writers, and innovators have displayed strong trickster characteristics, the willingness to violate conventional rules and expectations, the capacity to see familiar things from unexpected angles, and the ability to combine disparate elements in ways that create entirely new possibilities. The trickster's boundary-crossing nature makes this archetype particularly relevant for understanding processes of psychological and spiritual transformation. Genuine growth often requires moving beyond the familiar boundaries of established identity, experimenting with new ways of being and expressing, and maintaining openness to possibilities that the rational mind might initially reject as impractical or inappropriate. However, the trickster archetype can also appear in shadow or distorted forms when its energy becomes misdirected or unintegrated. The shadow trickster might manifest as compulsive rebellion against all authority, destructive behavior that creates chaos without constructive purpose, or the use of humor and irreverence to avoid genuine commitment and responsibility. Jung emphasized that authentic trickster energy serves transformative purposes. Its chaos and boundary-crossing behavior ultimately leads to new forms of order and integration, rather than mere destruction or disruption for its own sake. The trickster archetype also operates at collective levels, appearing in cultural figures, artistic movements, and social phenomena that challenge established norms and create space for new possibilities to emerge. These collective trickster manifestations often serve important evolutionary functions, preventing societies from becoming too rigid and helping cultures adapt to changing circumstances. Understanding the trickster archetype can provide valuable insight into life periods that seem chaotic, unpredictable, or filled with unexpected changes. Rather than seeing these times as purely problematic, recognizing the trickster pattern can help individuals understand that periods of creative chaos often precede significant growth and transformation. The trickster also represents the importance of maintaining a sense of humor and playfulness, even in the midst of serious psychological work and spiritual development. This archetype reminds us that growth doesn't always require solemn earnestness, that laughter, spontaneity, and creative play are also essential elements of authentic development. As you continue to rest in this state of peaceful awareness, you might sense the presence of your own inner trickster, that aspect of your nature that maintains flexibility, creativity, and the capacity for unexpected responses to life's challenges and opportunities. This trickster energy represents not disruption for its own sake, but the creative principle that prevents your personality from becoming too fixed or predictable, the force that keeps you open to new possibilities and capable of adaptive responses to changing circumstances. Tonight, as you sleep and dream, the trickster archetype may introduce elements of creative chaos into your dream experiences, offering perspectives and possibilities that your waking consciousness might not have considered, gently disrupting familiar patterns to create space for new insights and understanding to emerge. At the very center of Jung's archetypal psychology lies the most mysterious and profound pattern of all, the archetype of the self, that fundamental organizing principle that represents the totality of the human personality, the ultimate goal of psychological development, and the deep center from which all authentic growth and transformation emerges. The self archetype transcends all other archetypal patterns. It represents not just another aspect of personality, but the wholeness that emerges when all aspects of the psyche are recognized, accepted, and integrated into a coherent and authentic expression of individual potential. Jung understood the self as both the center and the circumference of the personality, the deepest core of individual identity, and also the expanded awareness that includes and transcends all partial identifications with particular roles, relationships, or aspects of character. This archetypal pattern represents what Jung called the goal of individuation, that lifelong process of psychological development through which individuals gradually become who they are meant to be, integrating all aspects of their personality into a unique and authentic expression of their deepest potential. The self differs fundamentally from the ego, that center of conscious awareness that most people identify as their primary sense of self. The ego represents only a small portion of the total personality, the aspects that are conscious, socially acceptable, and under voluntary control. The self encompasses the ego, but also includes all the unconscious contents, the shadow, the anima or animus, the various archetypal patterns, and the vast reservoir of potential that lies beyond current conscious awareness. Jung discovered that the self-archetype often appears in dreams and fantasies as symbols of wholeness, completion, and transcendence. Mandalas, circles, squares, crosses, and other geometric patterns that represent the integration of opposing forces, divine figures, or wise beings who embody perfect wisdom and compassion, or simply as a sense of profound peace and completeness that transcends ordinary psychological categories. The self-archetype also appears as the inner guide or teacher who provides direction and wisdom for the individuation process. That mysterious source of insight and understanding that seems to know more about our authentic potential than our conscious mind can grasp. Many people report experiences of guidance, inspiration, or inner knowing that seems to come from a source deeper and wiser than their ordinary conscious awareness. Jung understood these experiences as communications from the self-archetype, that deep center of personality that maintains connection to the individual's authentic potential and the larger patterns of psychological and spiritual development. The relationship between the ego and the self represents one of the most crucial dynamics in psychological development. In healthy development, the ego gradually learns to recognize and serve the deeper purposes of the self, becoming not the master of the personality, but the conscious agent through which the self can express its authentic potential in the world. This relationship requires what Jung called ego-self axis, a conscious connection between everyday awareness and the deeper center of personality that allows for authentic self-expression while maintaining practical effectiveness in daily life. When this axis is weak or broken, individuals often struggle with issues of meaning, purpose, and authentic self-expression. They may achieve external success, but feel empty or unfulfilled, or they may have profound spiritual experiences, but struggle to integrate these insights into practical life. The self-archetype is intimately connected to what Jung understood as the religious or spiritual dimension of human experience. He observed that individuals who successfully developed relationship with the self often reported experiences of connection to something larger than personal existence, a sense of meaning and purpose that transcended individual concerns and connected them to universal patterns of significance. However, Jung emphasized that the self-archetype was not identical to traditional concepts of God or divine consciousness. Rather, it represented the deepest and most authentic expression of individual potential, the unique way that universal consciousness expresses itself through each particular human being. This understanding allowed Jung to bridge psychology and spirituality without reducing either domain to the other, recognizing that psychological wholeness naturally opens into spiritual experience, while maintaining that authentic spirituality must be grounded in genuine psychological integration. The development of conscious relationship with the self-archetype typically occurs through what Jung called active imagination. Practices that allow consciousness to dialogue with unconscious contents and gradually integrate previously unknown aspects of personality. This might involve meditation, artistic expression, dream work, or simply maintaining openness to inner guidance and unexpected insights that seem to arise from beyond ordinary conscious thinking. The key is developing the capacity to listen to and respect the deeper wisdom of the psyche, while maintaining discrimination about which inner voices and impulses deserve to be followed. Jung observed that the self-archetype often constellated during times of major life crisis or transition, when familiar identity structures prove inadequate, and individuals are forced to discover more authentic sources of direction and meaning. These encounters with the self often involve what Jung called numinous experiences, encounters with the sacred or transcendent, that carry tremendous emotional charge and seem to reveal profound truths about the nature of existence and individual purpose. Such experiences might occur through dreams, meditation, artistic creation, time spent in nature, or simply through moments of profound insight or recognition that seem to come from beyond ordinary consciousness. The self-archetype also plays a crucial role in creative expression. Many artists, writers, and other creative individuals describe their most authentic work as coming not from conscious planning or effort, but from deeper sources that seem to possess their own wisdom and direction. This creative relationship with the self often involves learning to get the ego out of the way, allowing the deeper creative intelligence to express itself through the individual, while maintaining enough conscious participation to give the expression coherent form. Jung understood that the ultimate goal of psychological development was not the strengthening of ego consciousness, but the gradual alignment of ego awareness with the deeper purposes and wisdom of the self, creating a personality structure that could serve authentic expression while remaining connected to transpersonal sources of meaning and guidance. This alignment creates what Jung called psychological wholeness, a state of integration, where all aspects of personality work together in service of authentic self-expression and meaningful contribution to the larger human community. The self-archetype reminds us that we are more than our conscious thoughts, emotions, and daily concerns, that within each human being lies a deeper center of wisdom, creativity, and authentic potential that connects individual existence to universal patterns of meaning and purpose. As you continue to rest in this state of expanded awareness, you might sense the presence of your own self-archetype, that deep center of your being that has been quietly orchestrating your development throughout all your experiences, guiding you toward greater authenticity, integration, and meaningful expression of your unique potential. This recognition brings with it a profound sense of homecoming, the feeling of finally connecting with the deepest source of your own identity and purpose. The understanding that all your experiences, both joyful and challenging, have been serving the larger purpose of helping you become who you are truly meant to be. Tonight, as your consciousness naturally expands into the deeper layers of the psyche, you may encounter your own self-archetype more directly, experiencing that profound center of wholeness and wisdom that represents your deepest potential for authentic expression and meaningful contribution to the ongoing evolution of human consciousness. As our exploration of the archetypal patterns draws toward its gentle conclusion, we find ourselves not at an ending, but at a new beginning, carrying with us a deeper understanding of the universal patterns that shape human consciousness and connect every individual to the vast, ongoing story of psychological and spiritual development that defines our species. The archetypes we have explored tonight, the shadow, the anima and animus, the wise old man and woman, the great mother, the hero, the trickster, and the self, represent not separate, isolated phenomena, but interconnected aspects of a single, integrated system of psychological development that Jung called the individuation process. This process of individuation represents the fundamental drive toward wholeness that operates within every human psyche, the deep evolutionary pressure that moves consciousness toward greater integration, authenticity, and meaningful expression of individual potential in service of collective human development. Jung understood that this individuation process was not something that could be completed through conscious effort or willpower alone. It required patient, humble cooperation with the natural wisdom of the psyche, as it gradually revealed and integrated the various archetypal patterns that constitute complete human personality. The work of archetypal integration happens primarily through what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold the tension between opposing archetypal forces without immediately choosing one side or the other, allowing the natural wisdom of the psyche to discover creative solutions that honor all aspects of psychological complexity. This transcendent function develops through practices that maintain openness to the unknown, dream work, active imagination, creative expression, contemplative practices, and simply maintaining curiosity about the mysterious dimensions of human experience that transcend rational understanding. Jung emphasized that archetypal work was not a solitary endeavor. It required community, relationship, and engagement with the larger human story of cultural and spiritual evolution. The archetypes connect individual psychology to collective patterns of meaning and development, reminding us that personal growth serves not just individual fulfillment, but the ongoing evolution of human consciousness itself. The integration of archetypal patterns creates what Jung called psychological wholeness, a state of personality integration that allows for authentic self-expression while remaining connected to transpersonal sources of wisdom and guidance. This wholeness does not represent a static achievement, but a dynamic process of ongoing development that continues throughout life, each new experience offering opportunities for deeper integration and more authentic expression of archetypal potentials. As you prepare to carry these insights into sleep and dreams, remember that the archetypal patterns we have explored are not abstract concepts or theoretical constructs. They are living aspects of your own deepest nature, patterns that are actively shaping your development and offering guidance for your continued growth toward greater authenticity and meaningful expression. Tonight, as you surrender to the natural rhythms of rest and renewal, your psyche will continue this ancient work of archetypal integration, weaving together the various threads of your personality into an increasingly coherent and authentic expression of who you are meant to become. The dreams that come may reveal archetypal patterns that are currently active in your development, offering guidance, challenge, or simply the numinous presence of these deep structural patterns that connect your individual journey to the universal human story of growth, transformation, and the gradual evolution of consciousness toward greater wisdom, compassion, and authentic expression. Rest now in the knowledge that you are held and guided by patterns of wisdom that transcend individual understanding, archetypal forces that have guided human development since consciousness first emerged, patterns that will continue to support and guide your ongoing journey towards psychological wholeness and meaningful contribution to the larger human community. Sleep deeply, dream wisely, and allow the archetypal patterns of the collective unconscious to continue their ancient work of transformation and integration in the depths of your soul.